Mike, you good? All right, it's 6 o'clock. We'll call the meeting to order. First up, Pledge of Allegiance. All right, first up, agenda review and adoption. Looking for any changes or a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Agenda is adopted. Open forum. I believe we have a couple tonight.
You do have 3 tonight. So
Okay.
first up is John Burnett.
And I would just call out that open forum, we do allow 3 minutes. So we will have a timer for 3 minutes. Council is not, I guess, allowed to respond. It's input only.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
My name is John Burnett. I'm a resident and a Boy Scout leader. And I think that both sides of the park need to be preserved, and the Boy Scouts can help with that. We can shrub trails, build benches, have them installed according to city code, whatever. And it is a lot of free labor. So all we'd have to do is brush out the trail and stack the wood, and if anything has to be done with that, then we can work with the city and whatever it takes. So we're willing to help, and I guess that's about it. We can wouldn't be all done overnight, but it would be an ongoing thing with us. We have Eagle Scout projects that could be down there. We have just troop projects just to do community service. So we're a service organization, and we're here to help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary, I'll assume we've got contact information.
We do.
Awesome.
Yep, a number of scout troops, boy and girl, we've got contacts for. Steve Hennis is up next.
Mayor, members of the council, my name is Steve Hennis. I had the honor of serving on this council from 2007 to 2017. And I'm very proud of the fact that we have our Sartell Community Center and a designated downtown and town square, and then we added over 300 acres of new parkland, including the Sauk River Regional Park during that period of time. The funding for the Sauk River Regional Park has come from a number of sources. I still remember the day when Governor Tim Pawlenty came up with a highway patrol to inspect the original Daler property purchase, and that was, I believe, a $1 million bond request, and I don't think any of us probably expected that that was going to go through, but when Governor Pawlenty came up and looked at it himself in a snowstorm, it looked pretty positive, and he did make sure it stayed in there. Other funding for that park has come from the help of Representative Tim O'Driscoll, and Representative Larry Haas, and Representative Phyllis Kahn. And that was, I would say, a very cooperative effort between those legislators. I'm here this evening to ask for your support to build a walking bridge from the west side of the Sauk River to the 16 acres of the park located on the east side of the river. This bridge is a major amenity indicated in the 2013 DNR master plan. The walking bridge will open up the beautiful stretch of land and water so that as many people as possible may experience and participate in its legacy. Right now, the only way to to access this 16 acres is a narrow right-of-way that goes down a steep hill located in St. Cloud in the Mill Pond neighborhood. A walking bridge in the park would allow easy access to this beautiful portion of the park and last for generations to come with minimal maintenance. People could park in the current parking lot across from Sam's Club in Sartell and go down a gentle incline into the peaceful river valley. As far as the other park amenities such as trail development, benches, kayak rests, interpretive sites, and amphitheater, these can be added by using volunteer efforts such as the Scouts, as John mentioned, local environmental groups, and others. Benches could actually be made using some of the existing logs that are in the park. Cooperating with the St. Cloud Park Department to connect all the trails together will open up a lengthy trail system for hiking, snowshoeing, and cross-country skiing. I would recommend that the Public Works Department groom a classic ski track in the woods of the Sauk River Park and put a skate ski course at Pinecone Central Park. A classic ski trail at Pinecone Central Park can disappear in a matter of hours and with the wind. And I'm sure John's well aware of that, especially this year when we've had a lot of snow and wind. Lastly, I'd like to address the old Scout Bridge that comes over from St. Cloud Whitney Park. It is an old bridge that is not, is that my time? No? It's an old bridge that doesn't get you to the 16 acres. You can't get across that bridge and over to the other area. So it's important, and that's, plus it's quite an old bridge, and it's not accessible at all. I'm available anytime to take a tour of this beautiful part of the park that could be reached by a walking bridge. And you know, as far as accessibility from the top of the hill.
I'll have to.
Okay, all right.
Have to cut you there. Apologize.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Council members, next up is Peter Wilson.
My name is Peter Wilson. I live 1108 Celebration Drive, Sartell, Minnesota. I'm a local community activist and Agenda 21 abolitionist. I'm here on several things, mostly to start a process. One process I want to talk about very briefly is the 5G issue. I think before anything is permitted and or it can be rescinded, it's looked at closely. Again, we go back in history to the advent of lead in canned goods, to the use of mercury in many cases. Myself, I'm standing here. I used to break mercury switches out of washing machines and stoves to sell the mercury. So there's a number of things that are tolerated or accepted and later on found to become quite negative. So I guess I would like to see, with good fortune and hope, that there is both a study regarding short-term, let's say 5 to 10-year consequences, and next would be like a 20 to 30-year, and next 50 to 100-year. If they can do it on the fraud of man-made global warming, most assuredly they can do it on the real issue involved right here. Now, second, I would like to visit briefly on the League of Minnesota Cities. I would like to be appointed, if I could, as a citizen representative to go there. And again, that way it's not just elected officials or non-elected officials who are representing the city, but individuals also. I have heard from individuals who've been there some of the things that go on. I am extremely concerned on that. Some of you may have been there. Again, there are multiple facets to it, but most assuredly you would want someone other than just yourselves to be there. Again, I feel that that would assist the local community also, because I think many of them would be stunned, shocked, or surprised at what truly goes on, at least in all areas of it. So lastly, and I'm not going to do it tonight, I'm just kind of mentioning that I'm going to be doing it. I had mentioned to Anita that I was going to be coming here and opposing any and all activities, past or to be passed, regarding Agenda 21 and its impact on the local community and individuals. You cannot legislate away freedom, and you cannot take away what isn't yours. So I will be coming back on a recurring basis, and approaching these, I will be showing you what it is that has been signed, what it is, and who came up with the ideas, and who funds it. I thank you for the kindness and consideration.
Thank you. Did we have any more? That's it? All right. Looking for next item, approval of city council minutes. We can take all three, unless anyone has any corrections they'd like to see made.
Move for all three.
I have a motion for all three to be accepted. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a double second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Consent agenda, items A through N. Looking for a motion to approve those unless any need to be pulled for additional discussion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda items all carry. Next up is public hearing, right of way.
Mayor and members of the council, staff is requesting an amendment to your right-of-way ordinance. This is specifically related to provisions, to include provisions regarding small cell facilities and support structures. Over the course of the past several years, there's been some significant technological advances regarding small cell activity and small cell development in communities specifically. Small cell, if you recall, there's been some, I did include some information within your packets, but it's essentially a type of wireless infrastructure that is a little bit different than what you would see in terms of like a cell tower. These are typically smaller structures that you often see on a pole that's in a right-of-way. They're typically a little bit more discreet, but they complement cell towers and they're in providing greater capacity and adding coverage, especially in more denser areas. Usually you see them in more dense urban areas specifically. So while we haven't necessarily seen any activity within the city of Sartell up to this point, we do want to make sure that we have some provisions within our right-of-way ordinance in order to set some limitations or set some standards regarding aesthetics, and also to make sure that we have a process in order to handle any permits and processes in the event that we do receive any applications for small cells. The FCC does have very specific requirements and mandates regarding how we handle the processes of small cells. They also have very specific mandates regarding when this ordinance and what we can, in terms of aesthetics, has to be adopted by, and that's April 15th. So we are working within a time frame and a timeline that we need to kind of adhere to. As I mentioned in the memo, and as you may have read within the League of Minnesota Cities information, many cities are adopting these provisions. What I have included within our ordinance, within our right-of-way ordinance, is lifted from the League of Minnesota Cities. The city of St. Cloud is having a public hearing on their right-of-way ordinance this evening as well, with the same information and the same very similar amendments. So what we're looking at in terms of adding into your right-of-way ordinance, because often you do see these facilities and these support structures within your right-of-way, includes, in terms of aesthetics, making sure that any facilities, if they are proposed within your right-of-way, that the color and design in terms of both the structure and the facility are similar to what your light pole might be, or similar to your light pole or adjacent structure. That there are height limitations, that you have spacing requirements between these facilities. And again, making sure that you have an appropriate application process, permitting process, and review process that are within the federal and state guidelines and requirements. It also lays out the standards and requirements and language in case there's a co-location agreement, fees, and things of that nature. So it's really just laying the groundwork to allow the city to provide the permitting process, and allows the city to require certain aesthetic requirements in the event that the city receives a permit for a small cell application. The one thing that we are not allowed to do is prohibit small cells. That's an important thing to keep in mind. So upon obtaining any information from or input from the public, I would be looking for the approval or the consideration of an ordinance, amending the right-of-way ordinance along with a summary ordinance that would be for publication of the right-of-way ordinance, Chapter 7. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Right out of the gate, Anita, just for clarification, this is a proactive approach. We haven't to date received any applications for small cell.
That is correct. And part of it is that we want to get an ordinance in place before the April 15th deadline.
Council, any other questions before we open the public hearing? Tim?
Planning Commission has reviewed this and
No, this isn't an ordinance that the Planning Commission would have to review. This is kind of outside the zoning perspective. So this was reviewed by staff, was reviewed by SEH and their technical gurus and their right-of-way gurus and of course our city attorney.
okay.
Mike?
When we're talking about small cell structures,
Mhm.
when I hear structure, I think of like a little house or a building. That's not really what we're talking about.
There's essentially the support structure would be what you would think of as a pole, okay? And then you have the small cell facility, which would be, what would you consider the antenna?
Okay. So it's basically electronic things attached to a pole.
Correct.
Rather than a building or a shed or something along those lines.
Right. What you'll often see though, along with it, there might be some ground-mounted equipment that would be, necessary for it, that would be near the pole as well, but, they're usually, coordinated with the support structure as well.
Thank you.
I think the last gentleman that spoke had some on the overhead, is that?
Yes, that last picture was a
Last
small
picture, yeah.
cell, yes.
The Google machine.
Yeah, Google has them too. Any other questions? All right, we will open the public hearing. If you're wishing to testify on the right-of-way ordinance amendment, please step up to the podium. Anyone wishing to testify? Last call, anyone wishing to testify on the right-of-way ordinance amendment? Seeing no takers, we will close the public hearing. Council, any discussion or additional questions? If not, as stated by Anita prior, we would be looking for approval of the ordinance as proposed, along with the summary ordinance.
So moved?
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
A second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Old business, safe route to school and related street projects.
Yes, Mayor, members of the council, tonight for your consideration is approval of the plans for our Safe Routes to School and Street Utility Improvements Project and authorization to advertise this. This is just the title sheet of the project. The general scope of this project, 7th Street North is an overlay project, an edge mill and overlay. We'll do some miscellaneous concrete repairs. We'll do ped ramp replacements to bring them to ADA standards. We also plan to overlay the existing trail along 7th Street North, the bituminous trail. We have the blue areas down here. There's 2 blocks of blue here and 2 blocks of blue here where it's simply adding sidewalk to the existing road. So really little to no disturbance to the road itself, just adding a sidewalk next to the road. And then what's shown in red, there's a block of 2nd Avenue and 2 blocks of 5th Avenue. Those are full street and utility reconstruction projects. And the next slide, I'll kind of back up and explain how we got to this point. A number of years ago, a Safe Routes to School grant was applied for and received approximately $200,000 of Safe Routes to School funding to build a sidewalk on Second Avenue and to build a sidewalk on Fifth Avenue and a couple of blocks on 2.5 Street. And then when you cross-reference that with our capital improvement plan, you'll notice that the block of Second Avenue and 2 of the, call it 3 blocks of Fifth Avenue, were in our, kind of in the capital improvement plan queue, what we call the West Side Improvements Project. So in the next number of years, the intent or the need is there for a full street and utility reconstruction project. And so when we got the Safe Routes to School funding, we don't want to build the sidewalk knowing that we're gonna do a full reconstruction, you know, a number of years later, because the bulk of that sidewalk that you just constructed would kind of be removed and replaced, essentially wasting the intent of the Safe Routes to School money. So that's how we got those 3 blocks of full reconstruction in. It's kind of merging the 2 different projects into one. Similarly, on 7th Street North, the Safe Routes to School funding was simply to upgrade the pedestrian ramps along that corridor. And as you see when we do overlay projects, with the overlays, where you do the curb work, the pedestrian ramp work, and again, similar, if we're gonna do the overlay and we're gonna do the ped ramp work, they really need to be merged into one project for efficiencies and really the overall end result of the project. So what was originally a smaller Safe Routes to School sidewalk project has increased in scope just because of how it overlaps with our capital improvement plan. Again, the scope of the project, 2 blocks of sidewalk or add sidewalks to 2nd Avenue North, 5th Avenue North, and 2.5 Street North, as well as the ped ramps on 7th Street North. And there's actually 1 ped ramp on 5th Street North over by the elementary school. Again, full reconstruction. We've got 3 blocks of full reconstruction, the overlay of 7th Street North and the trail. And then when we presented the feasibility study to the council last fall, the direction was to add an additional block of sidewalk on would be the east end of 2nd and a half. To get the additional block gets us the connection to the school offices and the school grounds over there. And then the other piece that we added last fall was replacement of and adding in some additional pedestrian crossing systems on Pinecone Road and 7th Street North. And so we've set that up, and this project is essentially an add alternate through the bidding process. But again, that's the push button crossing systems. There's some radar feedback signage, a number of elements for kind of pedestrian accommodations and getting kind of a cloud-based system that we can operate here from City Hall. Here's our project timeline. The first couple up here in blue are already completed. We've done the feasibility study. We had a public information meeting last fall and a preliminary assessment hearing, and then we've completed the design at this point. Pending council approval of the plans tonight, we will be submitting yet this week to MnDOT. They need to review the plan since it does have the Safe Routes to School funding. That usually takes 4 to 5 weeks is the general rule of thumb. Once we get their approval, we'll advertise it. So we're somewhat subject on the MnDOT approval timeframe, but likely bidding it in late April or early May, which would set up a June construction. I'm estimating June through September for construction of this project. And we would have a final assessment hearing this fall. Again, street and storm sewer, I'll go through fairly briefly because I've kind of talked about it a fair bit, but again, you'll see on 5th Avenue, we've got the 2 blocks here from 2nd and a half, 2 blocks to the north, a full street and utility reconstruction. We're adding storm sewer, urban section roadway through this corridor and adding storm sewer up to the intersection. You'll notice the sidewalk is on the east side of 5th Avenue. And then down here is where this last 2 blocks, we actually did an overlay of 5th Avenue in 2017. That road was not, the utilities are in better shape and the road was not needing a full reconstruction. So that's the part of 5th Avenue where we're simply adding a sidewalk on the east side of the road. Up here is the current middle school property, so it creates that connection to the schools. Here's the 2.5 Street. Again, it's just adding sidewalk on the north side of 2.5 Street all the way over to 3rd Avenue. And then Second Avenue, again, we got one block of adding sidewalk on the east side of Second Avenue, and again, full street and utility reconstruction. The typical sections are a little bit tough to read. The full reconstruction, we're looking at 36 feet wide roads, curb to curb, so 18 feet on either side. Again, we are adding curb and gutter and storm sewer to make it more of an urban section. And then the sidewalk is a 6-foot concrete sidewalk with a 4-foot grass boulevard. Of note, originally last fall, our original kind of design or feasibility study was 6-foot boulevards, 6-foot sidewalk. And through the public informational meetings and the public hearing, there was a desire from the neighborhood to kind of shrink that up as much as we could, and we were able to shrink it to 4. We didn't really want to go lower than that. You need some snow storage in that grass boulevard is the main reason. And then here's just a section where we're adding the sidewalk without disturbing the road itself. Same 4-foot boulevard, 4-foot sidewalk. And then this bottom one here is just our overlay of 7th Street North. It's simply edge milling, 8 feet on either side, and then a 2-inch bituminous overlay for both the road as well as the trail itself. Sewer and water main are somewhat limited. 5th Avenue, you'll notice we've got approximately 1 block of water and only about a half a block of sanitary sewer shown in red there. A little bit of water main work in that intersection. And then on 2nd Avenue, it's just a block of water main and the associated service work. I selected this removal sheet just to highlight one thing, and that is the fact that anytime you're adding sidewalk, you're increasing the footprint of your road just by the nature of adding sidewalk next to it. So we are gonna see some tree loss. This is the main area. This is the east side of 5th Avenue. Again, this is right where the sidewalk's going. And there's, I didn't count them up, I guess, but there's approximately, I'd say maybe 10, 12 trees that'll be removed as a part of this project.
If I recall correctly, those are pine trees that were done there when the twin homes were put in.
Those are not pine trees. John, help me remember what kind of trees they are. Do you remember? They're deciduous trees.
Yeah, I think they're silver maples
Okay.
and some of that.
So they're larger trees, nicer trees. Again, they're physically in the way of the construction project, and then maple trees have a root system that kind of causes problems if they're right next to the sidewalk anyway. And so that's part of the project is to remove those trees and a handful of others, but this is by far the most significant area where we have that problem.
Is there a replacement of trees as well?
There is not planned, mostly because that 4-foot grass boulevard probably isn't wide enough to put it in there. So this is a little bit of an issue of, I don't know that there's a good spot to put it. And then there's probably not quite enough room behind the sidewalk, so. And here's just the overlay of 7th Street North. Again, we're doing the road as well as the trail itself. And then at the end of that, we will restripe 7th Street North back to its current lane configuration. Here's the kind of map of the various pedestrian crossing systems, again, along Pinecone Road North and 7th Street North. It's a combination of, again, the RRFB push-button pedestrian crossing systems and radar feedback signage, as well as just standard road warning signage. Again, we're planning to bid that as an ad alternate. Estimated project costs. We are estimating the base bid construction of $1.44 million. That ad alternate is about $356,000 is our estimate. And then you put all the soft costs together, we're still holding a 5% contingency on this project, which gives our total project estimate base bid only of $1,855,000. With the alternate, it's $2,210,000 or $11,000. And again, of these project costs, $200,000 approximately is Safe Routes to School funding. This is just the project, or the properties, excuse me, that are involved in special assessments for this project. Again, we've had our preliminary meeting. If the council moves forward and we do the construction, we'll have a final assessment hearing this fall. General rule of thumb for our assessments, again, we went through this last fall, but with some new council members, I'll briefly touch on it again. We are not assessing for safe routes to school eligible items. We are not assessing for 7th Street North overlay or the pedestrian crossing and radar feedback signs if that's continues as a part of the project. What we are assessing for the street at a 35% assessment rate on a front footage basis. The storm sewer, 35% of the storm sewer cost on square footage of drainage area. The sanitary sewer, we would be assessing 35% of the main, 100% of the sewer, similarly on the water main. And then of note, typically most of these properties are gonna hit this cap of $8,000 or 8% of their estimated market value for their property. So if they're in the full reconstruction area, more likely than not, they'll hit that cap. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mike?
John, with the pedestrian crossing on 7th and Pinecone, is that going across 7th between, say, the Holiday and the Fields, or is it going across Pinecone?
There's a couple of different locations. There's a couple on 7th Street North, and then there's also one on Pinecone Road. It's actually up at Pinecone Central Boulevard. Actually, originally, the intent was to put it at 7th Street North and Pinecone, and then there was a desire to move it. We thought it was more appropriate at Pinecone Central Boulevard.
Okay, so there'll be two, one going across.
Correct. You'll have one, yep.
And then one by Pinecone Central Park. The one by 7th and Pinecone, if down the road we need to make some traffic changes, is there a way to re-implement that material into any kind of traffic changes that we need to, or are we basically gonna lose it down the road?
And actually, again, we had originally proposed, in fact, actually this map is outdated. This was from last fall. We had shown it originally, and actually the grant was to put it at Pinecone and 7th Street North, that crossing system. Partly for that concern and partly for a need up at Pinecone Central Boulevard. We've basically just taken that same system and we're gonna install it at Pinecone Central Boulevard, thinking that there's likely, as council may recall, we've talked at a number of times, kind of after the high school relocates, we'll probably be looking at this intersection for just what you were kind of alluding to there, Mike. There may or may not be some changes to this intersection. So, but again, it'll be kind of a moot point because we're going to move that system up to Pinecone Central Boulevard.
That's what we had talked about in the fall, is we actually applied for it for 7th Street.
Correct.
We're implementing it at Pinecone Central Park
Okay.
Boulevard.
Yep.
Okay.
Council, can I just clarify, because from a finance position, we would be recommending against the add alternates. So is any part of that staying in if the council doesn't approve? And you guys know that's just because you're cashing this one out of your street fund. So when you're at 1.6 million or whatever it is, and then this add alternate, I think the estimate was 350,000. It's not a major cost savings to do it now versus doing it sometime later. But again, you can hear from John and Jim about the pedestrian system, and at this point, you're just authorizing bids. So maybe you want to see the final pricing, but from our standpoint with what you're already doing, the East Side Street bids, which are up next, and the public safety facility taking some money from street funds, we just didn't feel like now is the time to add that 350,000 on. But again, I'm not sure if that means it's all out or.
No, it's a good point, Mary. Thank you. Because one of the systems was included in the Safe Routes to School funding application, one of them has to be installed. And so the one across Pinecone Road at Pinecone Central Boulevard is included in the base bid numbers I just presented.
Okay.
The add alternate is for kind of the additional systems that were going to be locally funded. But
Right.
again, because we told the state when we applied for this funding, we were gonna build it, we need to follow through on that. So one is included in the base bid.
And that's gonna be the one at the park?
Yep.
Pinecone Central.
Pinecone Road and Pinecone Central Boulevard.
Okay.
I don't
That
know
makes
it-
sense, because I see a lot of kids crossing there
it's-
every day on my way to work, so.
And it's only gonna get, more traffic, pedestrian traffic there with the new high school.
Yep.
Path going all the way out there. That's the one that I'm really concerned about. But council, look for your input. I don't think it hurts to bid them all out. We can at least look at what a firm number would be. Today, we're thinking that's a 350. I mean, does it hurt us in the market or any way to have them bid out?
I don't believe it does. I mean, you know, we've gone through the legwork of getting it prepared to be bid out, you know, doing the plans and specs, so that would be my recommendations. You might as well bid it and see what the numbers are.
Is there any objection to proceeding with the bid? Or having it bid out and then we'll review the numbers?
No, I actually think that's a really good idea because for a couple of reasons. Number one, it lets us know what we're dealing with. It also gives us time to maybe talk to Public Works and Chief Hughes with how much pedestrian traffic we're actually getting there, and what we can expect as in the way of change with pedestrian crossings of Pinecone once we've got the traffic heading north up to the school and things like that. So I don't think it hurts us to look at it at all.
I would agree.
Yeah, I agree too, Mike.
John, a couple questions I had. The crossing you're showing on 7th Street at 7th Avenue, looks like you're moving that to the west side of the intersection versus where it's at on the east side today. With the crest of the hill there, does that raise any concern? Someone traveling west to east?
I might need to look into that and get back to you. I know that as we looked at this whole corridor, we had our traffic engineer looking for the locations of the crossings specific to just the ped ramps as well
Yep.
as these push-button pedestrian crossing systems. I might need to pick his brain to see exactly why he picked that side of the
Okay.
intersection, so I can maybe follow up with you in the next meeting.
Yeah, that'd be my only concern. That's right in front of Fenice's house there. The soccer fields, obviously we get a decent amount of traffic.
You said that was 7th Avenue, right?
Yeah, 7th Avenue and 7th Street. So we've got today it's striped with the crosswalk on the east side of the intersection, but we're showing the ped ramps are going on the west side. And then the other thing that I would have, and more just for council, for us to continue to consider is that we will now have a reconstructed nice bike path from Pinecone all the way down to 5th Avenue. Yet there's a gap between, is it 5th or, yeah, 5th. No, sorry, it'd be 2nd Avenue. It'll stop, and then there's nothing between that and River Road, right? So, obviously, we can't afford to do it right now, but something for consideration is how do we finish that down to River Road so we can have a connector from pedestrian traffic all the way from River Road to Pinecone, up and down 7th Street. The other area I would call out, and we talked about it last fall when we were doing this bid, and I believe it was about $75,000 more, and we opted not to. But we look at the 2.5 Street, and we finished there at 5th Avenue. So we're adding sidewalk, from 5th to 3rd, and then we've got a block there where we don't have sidewalk to the district school, or the district offices. And so, I mean, when we're thinking safe routes to school and pedestrian traffic, we essentially terminate them today onto streets, which the goal is to keep them on sidewalks or keep them out of that right of way.
We did actually, per our discussion last fall, add that additional block on 2.5 Street right here. So this does go all the way over now.
Oh, it does? Okay.
Yep.
I thought that was,
Last fall, this portion here was
Not
not
on there.
included. So this was, I think our estimate was maybe $35,000 or $40,000 of construction to add that block right there, which we've now added to the project.
awesome. So that will fully connect. Okay. That was my concern, is we still didn't have that on there. So then it'd just be that 7th Street that I think we should continue to consider on future roadway projects, and maybe that's part of the finishing the West Side Streets project, is how do we connect those corridors? And we know as we drive around the city, we've got a lot of dead-end sidewalks, and we can't fund them all, but try and clean them up when we're doing projects. Anyone else have anything? All right, looking for a motion to adopt the resolution. And I think we had consensus with the alternates to be bid out.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve that.
Motion, do we have a second?
Second?
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next up is East Side Streets.
Yeah, Mayor, members of the council, we did open bids for our East Side Street reconstruction project on February 28th, I believe. I wished I was reporting better news. The bids did come in substantially higher than our engineer's estimate, approximately 13%. The engineer's estimate was $6,583,000. The low bid from CNL Excavating was in the amount of $7,459,000, so about a 13% over the estimate. As we kind of went back and reviewed this, the main areas I would contribute to the increased cost, or over the estimate anyway, is bituminous, gravel, and the earthwork all saw substantial increases from what we used as our baseline was kind of the large construction projects, Carnegie 29 and Pinecone Road last summer. We saw some pretty substantial increases in the costs of those three categories of work. Obviously, there's some other miscellaneous areas that kind of add up to this increase over the estimate. As with all unit price projects, there is, we hope and feel to be the case in this project, there's some conservative estimates on some of the line items where we feel like, with a good construction project, there's ways to potentially save and get some of that perceived additional cost back. I don't know that we'd ever recoup the entire, $800,000 or $900,000, but I think there's some low-hanging fruit in the way of, we've very conservatively estimated the amount of topsoil that needs to be hauled into the site. We've also very conservatively estimated the amount of subgrade excavation. So there's some ways to hopefully get that cost a little bit closer to our original estimate on the project. Now, normally when you see a project come in, substantially over the engineer's estimate, you think about potentially rebidding it, and certainly at a staff level, we did think about that. We did that fairly recently with the Celebration Alley project, and we had our reasons for doing it on that one. As I look at this project, the reasons I don't think that's the right approach here, we got 5 very good, local, well-qualified bidders. We got the right bidders to bid on the project. Essentially, we were the first large construction project similar to this kind of out the door through the bidding process this year. So I think we hit the right bidding window. And the other piece of the puzzle is all 5 bids ranged from 7.4 to 7.8, which is a fairly tight bidding window. On a large project, the tight bidding window gets a little bit bigger on a percentage basis. So for those 3 reasons at a staff level, I think we're just seeing a jump in some construction costs over the past year. And based on that, our recommendation would be to award it to CNL Excavating. Again, they're a very well-qualified local contractor who we've worked with a lot and have great confidence in. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have on that bidding process.
Council, any questions?
Just one quick question, John. Just to understand it a little bit more, what is driving the cost up? Obviously, dirt still costs the same as dirt always cost. But is it fuel? Is it equipment? What's pushing that industry up so high? Do you know offhand?
It's probably all of it. I don't know that I know. In fact, actually, Kevin Cox is with CNL Excavating. He may be able to answer better if you wanted to ask him. But we just see the end result of the unit prices. I think it's a little bit of everything from labor to materials. Concrete structures is another one we saw a big jump in. That's the material price. Sewer manholes and storm sewer manholes, which on this project we have a lot of them. We saw and expected an increase. We didn't estimate high enough. It was even above and beyond what we had kind of substantially increased our estimate, and it even went above that. We started to see those concrete material prices go up last summer. Shortages, lengthy timeframes to get them, and the prices have been increasing. So I think it's a kind of a little bit of everything for those various components of the project.
We had a pretty tight, I guess I'd say a pretty aggressive plan on what can be shut down, what needs to have throughway streets. Probably more aggressive than I've saw in past projects. Did that play? It was a great plan, and I think it's great for the residents of the east side dealing with it. Do we think that played into just flexibility?
My answer I think is no, and I've asked several of the low bid contractors if that was a factor in it, and their answer to me was no, that did not really affect their bid. I agree, we are phasing this thing out more substantially than the average project, and I think appropriately so. Just to kind of minimize the impact to the neighborhood, but, at least, the response back from the 2 of these 5 bidders was that this phasing plan didn't drive up their price, more than the average project.
Mike?
Mary, I'm assuming that if we go forward with this project, this will not affect the $8,000 assessment. I believe it's an $8,000 assessment cap they have on the east side project. That won't be affected by this.
Right, that's final council decision, but we wouldn't be recommending a change on that, and we've got this pricing now, put into your financial plans. I think the only thing it impacts is, how soon can you do your next desired overlays, but you guys will run into that again and again. I mean, you have swings on, you guys might remember sometimes, last time you spent it on, loaders when you had general fund reserves. And there's times you have a good operating year or good bids on some other project, and we pump all that we can into that street fund so that you just make a year-by-year decision on overlays. But this one's a big one, and it's a bunch of overlays too. I mean, it's a massive reconstruct, but it's also overlaying these side streets that aren't ready for reconstruct. So you are keeping up with your goals of accomplishing these reconstructs that are still needed. You've got the west side left, but beyond that, we're trying to continue to do overlays every year and maintain the streets you've got.
But to Mike's question, not all the residents there were already capped at 8,000, right? And so there would be some that were under the 8,000 cap.
Trying to picture that roll. It's 8% or 8,000. So,
So anyone
and
that
it's
was under
8%
the
of their
cap.
value.
Yeah, anyone that was under the cap prior will likely see an increase, right? Because the total project cost has gone up.
Right.
You didn't factor it on project cost, though. You factored it on, if they were lower, is it the lesser of 8% or 8,000? I'm just trying to think of that.
I think Ryan's right in a limited number of properties that only had a small portion of the assessment.
Oh, because it was
wouldn't be-
total,
you might
or,
get
You might have some of these
Yes, they were
properties that
below
have a
both.
$2,000 or $3,000 assessment that were nowhere near the cap.
yes,
And
I get what
yet-
you're saying.
Yes, this could affect them. Obviously, the council can tell us otherwise. I would say that in those assessment numbers, these numbers aren't final yet, even after the bidding process. Again, we're hoping that through some unit price savings, some doing a little bit less work based on conservative estimates, will bring the project down a little bit. And again, this is 13% over our estimate. We were holding a 10% contingency with the feasibility study and those original assessments. And so I'd say at this point, we probably are over. I don't know that it's impossible to pull it back down more in line, or at least not as substantial of an increase to those types of properties.
Yeah, and personally, I have confidence in staff that we're doing everything we can to keep that in line. My concern is of the residents that are going to see an increase from what they were expecting. Because when we had the East Side open public hearing, we had a lot of them, and we got really good feedback. So I'm more pondering how many are going to be affected by this increase in cost, and then I know we've got a statutory process of how we communicate to them, and I guess I would ask staff that we be as flexible as possible in communicating with them. And you guys have done a great job on other projects like that of hey, if there's 10 of them, let's reach out and touch those 10 to say, here's the situation we're at. We know that it's at a council discretion, and once the project's finalized and we go through that process to determine what their final assessment is, but I don't want them just opening their mail up 3 months from now to get a letter that it's $2,000 more than what they heard 3 months ago, I guess.
Oh, that's fair. We can certainly kind of sort through that list and pick out the properties that essentially haven't hit the cap and reach out to them.
Council, any other items? I don't think it's a great pill for us to swallow, but the east side streets have been talked about for a very long time. So I think there's a strong desire to get it done, and
Yeah, and with obviously those 4 bids you said, they were all within
7.4 to 7.8, so they were all what I would call
Right.
tight on that kind
Yeah.
of scale of a project. So that's, like I said, that's a clue that I think we've got the right construction number.
Rather than rebidding, opening.
Correct.
Okay.
My, without having a crystal ball, I don't think rebidding is gonna result in different numbers here necessarily.
So we'd be looking for a motion to move forward with a resolution, or possibly taking a different route, but
So we had the resolution, the agreements that were attached, and then the meter replacement that we've discussed as
Yep.
part of this, all in one motion.
and then,
I would make that motion.
okay, we got a motion for all three?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll second.
motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Finally getting the east side streets done. I know Mr. Hennis has talked about it for a long time, so.
I just add one more thing, going back to the previous project, the Safe Routes to School project, I wanted to let you know, I mean, we have taken this information and factored in those numbers that we had crunched for the Safe Routes to School project. Kind of that balancing act of not being too reactive to it, but trying to factor in what we learned with the east side bidding and what seems to be a construction jump here. So hoping to avoid a repeat of this bitter pill to swallow. We're do our best to try to pin down the numbers as best we can, and once in a while this happens, so.
I could have sworn someone told me we were gonna go to the Super Bowl last year, and that didn't happen, so. These things happen, man, don't worry about it. You can't foresee
Historically, you guys
everything.
have been a little high in our bids, and so, or in the projections. So we'd come to a meeting like this, and it's, hey, you're saving $500,000. Where do you want to put it? So
That's an easier decision to make,
Right.
so thank you for understanding.
that's why we were telling Strack earlier tonight that he needs to be as tight as possible on the public safety facility. All right. Next up is flood mitigation study for County Road 1 project.
Mayor and council, for your consideration this evening is a flood mitigation feasibility study. Stearns County is planning to reconstruct County Road 1 in 2021. And so to get in front of that project, the area around Deseric and some of those homes kind of north of there has historically flooded in the past. And so we want to do our due diligence in looking at if there are any flood mitigation measures that would make sense and that would be feasible that could be incorporated in with that reconstruction project of County Road 1. Staff has met with both Deseric and the county, and there is a cost share proposed to complete the feasibility study. Deseric would chip in $10,000 for the study, and then the county and city would then split, excuse me, the remaining portion of that feasibility study. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions with the proposal that's in front of you this evening.
Council, any questions?
So ultimately, if we do the study and we find that there's some things that we can do
It's a very good question. So it depends what the mitigation measure is. Right now, we don't really have a good feel for if a mitigation measure means we need to raise the road a half a foot or if it's a 5-foot wall. And that's why we need to do this study to get a better understanding of what is needed. County indicated if it's within the curb, they would pay for that. If it's something outside the curb, that would probably be the city or Deseric or whoever we would have to talk about it at that time. Of note, though, there are funding agencies available that we could apply for flood mitigation measures that aren't a guarantee, but that we could apply for as well. But we really need to take this first step in looking at the data, looking at the FEMA models, and assessing what, if anything, is really needed for this area.
And the cost of $39,700.
So that total is, 10,000 is coming from, Deseric, and then the county and city split the remainder, so you're 14,350 is your stormwater fund.
Okay.
Yep.
That's fine.
I think it's great. I mean, we've got three different entities coming together to split it, and I think Deseric is very happy to be part of it, so. April, we appreciate you coming to the table with projects, splitting the cost versus John. With a $1 million increase for us, so.
Could you sit down over there? April, how'd you like to sit?
April wants to look at the East Side Street project while she's at it, or?
To be fair, we discussed who was gonna talk about the East Side project tonight, and he drew
On
the
that one.
short straw.
Yeah. Council, anything else on the flood mitigation study? Looking for a motion to approve that agreement.
So moved.
Motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. New business. Approval of final plat for Arbor Trails 3.
Mayor, members of the council, we are requesting final plat approval for the final phase of Arbor Trails. This would be including the addition of 43 lots. The developer will be essentially engineering the entire final plat, but will be constructing the improvements essentially in two phases, with the northerly portion with the first phase, the southerly portion as the second phase. The Planning Commission did review this final plat and does recommend approval. Staff also recommends approval of the final plat and the development agreement. So for your consideration, you can review please approve the resolution and final plat for Arbor Trails 3.
So the draft from the Planning Commission, they talked about phase 3 and phase 4. Both those phases are under Arbor Trails Plat 3.
Correct.
Okay. And I know there's questions at the Planning Commission that we didn't have the ability to hear the answer to, but do we know why they're final platting this all as one?
Because they want to do all of the engineering as one. So John can do all of his work as one,
Versus, okay,
as two
versus
separate.
two projects?
Mhm.
Okay. Council, any discussion?
Is there, I might be missing it, is there a plan for,
Yes, there would be all of the required improvements for any development, so streetlights, street signs, sidewalks on one side of each street, as any typical city requirement for city development. 40,
single, or 43 single-family lots?
correct, all
So
meeting,
lacking houses.
correct, single-family homes meeting the R1 single-family zoning requirements.
It's good. Yeah, it is. So typically, a developer would do the final plat in phases, and they'd install the streetlights and all the complete, I guess, everything necessary before they'd move on and do a final plat or the next phase. Being there's two phases under this final plat, before they get ability to have occupancy, would we require all streetlight to be completed for the entire plat 3, or just for the phase 3 of that? Did that make sense?
Kind of take out of your mind that there's a phase 4.
Okay.
Because, so phase 3 and phase 4 was only in reference to what was within the preliminary plat.
Okay.
So, so think of now that phase 3 and 4 was combined into one phase and is now part of, and is now considered what is now Arbor Trails 3.
Okay.
So in terms of, yes, so when all of the engineering will be done at one time, the construction for the northerly portion will occur all at once before any construction for the area in the south part. They'll have to, no building permits will be issued. Nothing will be able to be constructed until the utilities are in, until the first lift is in, until the
Yeah.
hydrants are charged, all of those things are completed.
Okay. That's what I was cautious about, is by approving this, if a couple lots could be done, and then everyone else just kind of gets put on hold, and who knows what happens in the market in the future. And we've had other developments that were final platted, and certain utilities aren't added in, and so we're saying that's all taken care of.
Yes, that is taken care of within the development agreement.
Okay. Council, any other questions? If not, we'd be looking for a motion to adopt a resolution approving plat and development agreement with the conditions stated.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second?
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I think we're all excited to see additional single-family lots going in. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Department reports. Chief Hughes.
Mayor, members of the council, good evening. You have my report before you. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer questions.
Any questions for Chief Hughes? All right, Public Works.
Good
John.
evening, Mayor and members of the council. You have my report. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer.
A lot of questions on what's burning on the southwest side of town lately. And then,
Compost.
and then today on the east side of the river. Yeah.
Yeah, the same thing's going on in Sauk Rapids today.
On purpose?
Burning Christmas trees.
Yeah, we kind of lost our outlet for our compost brush. For years, we've had a grinder that would come in for no cost, grind the product, and then he gets the product, which is about, anywhere from 12 to 15 semi-loads of mulch, and they were hauling it down to Benson to burn for energy. Since there was a purchase of that plant, they have closed that plant down, so our outlet has gone away that we had for about 10 years. So our options were, the price tag was pretty high to grind it and haul it. We could grind it and keep it, but I don't know what we'd do with, 15 loads or more of mulch. So we checked many outlets, and we got down to, we just need to burn it to get rid of it, because we've got a lot. So it worked out well. I mean, a lot of snow. We had, you gotta kind of shoot for the right wind or no wind, and, you'd really, you try to do the best you can, but we've had a lot of wind, we've had a lot of snow, and our open window was last week, Wednesday and Thursday, so we took it. So overall, it went well, though.
Good. Any questions for Public Works?
Thank you.
Engineering. John.
You have my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for John? Planning, community development.
I have no further questions, but I would be happy to answer if you have any additional.
Okay. Any questions? Nope. And finance.
Heidi
Mary,
did have
you
a
take them
no, Heidi had a conflict this evening, so I can try to answer. You can feel free to shoot her an email, and she can respond.
Any questions we can stump Mary with? Anyone?
I'll get April up here.
Perfect. All right, city council updates. Mike.
Just applaud John and the rest of Public Works on the snow removal. I managed to get out of my alley only to get stuck in the street. And one of the plow drivers was very, very nice and helped me push my daughter's car back into a position where I could actually move someplace. So I know you guys were working round the clock and working very hard. So I just wanted to express appreciation for all your efforts.
Nothing for me.
You didn't get stuck in the driveway?
I did have a witness say that they did see Mayor Fitzham stuck in his four-wheeler in his alley using a chain or
That is true. Yeah. And I didn't have anyone stop by to help either.
Can't imagine why.
Yeah.
To clarify, the only reason that he helped was because I was blocking his way, and he couldn't actually plow until I was moved.
Brady.
Nothing at this time.
I don't have anything else, but again, just thank you again for your great job.
And I don't have anything to report either. So, looking for a motion to adjourn. Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.